Okay. Good afternoon, folks. I thought I would take this time to go over some of the social studies materials that I've placed in my folders on the website. So if you go to my folders, if you go to DRBC, Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment, you will find, when you scroll down further, you'll find a folder that has March Professional Day materials. I'm going to start by going over the original document that you've received. The document that you've received initially gives you a breakdown of the day. Now, I want you to think about this outline as a lesson plan. I want you to look at the objectives and figure out for you and for your faculty what's the best way for you to meet those objectives. Now, in essence, I think I've given you more than enough materials, but I want you to go through them. I want you to first digest them, pardon the pun, and then I want you to think about how best you could relay the information. But the objectives are really very simple. First objective is to provide an understanding of the social studies standards and the framework. We want teachers to be able to analyze, evaluate, adapt, and implement the inquiry design model. We want you to spend time talking about how to inculcate or infuse a Catholic worldview into your lessons. Those are the main objectives. And when you look at the 3 sessions that we've outlined, it pretty much follows that same format. What I've also done is I've given you an additional document. If you look in the folder, it's called Points. And when you look at that particular document, once I get it up here, hold on. It's going to give you more specificity in terms of things that you can do. Now, I actually created this based upon the urgings of one of our principals who said it would help if she had a bulleted list of things that should be covered. So I thought about it and I said, well, that's not such a bad idea. So let's look at some of the things that I put into the list. First and foremost, there are documents that you yourself must read for your own background information. Those documents are the 3C Framework for Social Studies Standards, the New York City Social Studies Standards and Framework, the New York State Field Guide, and then the New York State Social Studies Framework K-12 Introduction. Each of those pieces have important points to make as it relates to the teaching of social studies. I even wrote a little introduction, something for you to think about in terms of providing the direction for your day. First and foremost, I think it's important for all teachers to understand that they need to have a broad overview of the social studies standards and framework. Social studies teachers obviously will have to take a deep dive into the standards, but all teachers should know the topics at each grade level and have what I call an aerial view of the standards. It's important for all teachers to understand how all standards connect from one grade level to the next in all content areas. And also for teachers to look at how connections can be made across content areas. Now, why? Well, very simply, we all learn by making connections. When information goes into your brain, it connects to something. If it doesn't connect to something, it's lost. That's why there has been such a push in recent times for us to look at the conceptual development, the skills that students have or need for college and career readiness. Because it's those skills, it's the conceptual development that's going to help them become thinking students. and hopefully, in years to come, productive citizens. So basically, we all learn by making connections, and it's important for us as educators to look at how we can foster connections in and across the curriculum. Now, in the first session, I would say that teachers should spend some time looking at the actual 3C framework for the social studies standards. I think that you should actually look at the standards themselves as they're contained in the New York Social Studies Standards and Framework. Now, I've put all of those documents actually in a folder that says foundational documents, so they will be easy to find. The New York Field Guide, you should have copies. Actually, I should say, not that you should, there needs to be copies of the framework, the standards, and the field guide. In addition to that, you want to reference the standards. The standards are the same standards that we've had since 1996. History, geography, civics, economics, those are the same standards. But what's important, and there are materials as you look through the folders that will foster that connection between math ELA and the science practices. In fact, you will see in some of the presentations, in fact, the CLT folder contains a presentation. It's a presentation that Liz Frangella and I did this past Saturday at St. John's, and she actually, within those slides, had a slide that showed how all the practices connected. And I think it's important for teachers to look at that slide and to really talk about that slide. Maybe later we'll go into the actual folders, and I'll try to pull that up for you. During the second session, that's basically going to give you a good overview of the standards. In the second session, what I think you should do, or what I think, again, you must do, is look at a sample of the regions. Now, granted, the regions does not affect us, but look at the sample that Greg Alquist provided. That would be in the folder for the turnkey leaders, because I left all of the presentations intact according to the way they've been presented. So there are basically three presentations that I'm drawing on: the CLT, the presentation that was done for the administrators, and there's a presentation that was done for the turnkey leaders. The principal's presentation was more of an overview. I would spend more time looking at the Greg Alquist folder, the turnkey leader folder, and I would spend more time looking at the CLT refresher folder, because Liz and I went more into the inquiry design model and into the session 3 materials, the Catholic identity piece. But again, let teachers see what's coming. Why? Because I think it's very important that they know where they're going. And I think it's also very important for us to make the case that if the skills that are necessary for our students to achieve well on the regents, they must have the skills in elementary school. It's going to be very hard for them to play catch-up once they get into freshman and sophomore year of high school. Now, there's a whole host of other information that's in these presentations, but again, I'm honing in on what I think is most important, and then you could fill in the backstory, so to speak. I think the inquiry design model is very important. Now, an inquiry, you'll remember, Greg defined as larger than a lesson, but smaller than a unit. So you can continue to, the way I look at it is these IDMs, these inquiries, could really be embedded within the units that you are teaching. So look for ways to embed the inquiry design model into the units. What's essential, I think you need to spend time talking about the dimensions. Now again, I'll go back to the CLT refresher folder in the presentation that Liz and I did, and if you look at that PowerPoint, you will find a slide that I like because it shows you the dimensions and it shows you how it fits into the teaching of social studies, how it relates to the standards. I think that's a good slide to work with. I think the inquiry arc is worthy of discussion. Obviously, you need to show them the templates the templates for the inquiry design models, the IDMs, and the templates that we amended very simply by incorporating the Catholic identity. And again, if you look at the CLT refresher course, what you'll see, or the CLT refresher workshop, what you will see is a blank template for you to use. But in addition to that, there's a template that has the questions fleshed out. So it'll give you points of discussion, and it'll help teachers look at points of discussion, or be the centerpiece of discussion, actually. The third session is really where you want to hone in on the Catholic identity piece. In the presentations, I think, again, it's the CLT folder, you're going to find the 7 themes of social justice. You will see them marked on grade level. There's one for lower grades, one for middle grades, one for upper grades, one even for adults. In addition to that, if you look at the CLT folder, and if you look again at the PowerPoint presentation that's in there, on the actual slide where I mentioned the 7 themes, I also put a link that'll take you right to the USCCB website, which again gives you more background information for yourself or for anybody else who wants it. Additional catechetical resources can be found at the CICI-online.org website. That's the National Catholic Educational Association. That was their website that they developed. And actually, I believe a lot of our teachers have units on there from ELA and maybe some from math. But then the remainder of the afternoon will really be spent with social studies teachers working in groups, special subject area teachers working in groups, to look at ways that they can infuse Catholic identity into the inquiries. For the special subject teachers, they should be looking at ways that they can support the social studies connections in their content areas. So again, this is just some bullet points for you to use and for you to look at when you are planning your day with your principal. And again, what I think you should be doing is I think you should be working with your principal, and you should be looking at ways that you're going to have the day unfold in your school. If you look again, I'll go back. Under additional resources, I put some documents that I've received that I thought were helpful. One is constructing social studies learning experiences. This particular document, okay, it's not opening for me. Let's see if I can get it to open. Okay, this document has some very simple lesson planning ideas, or ideas to promote, get that out of there, lesson planning. So you might want to take a look at this. Now these, again, these are just materials that you could look at if you decided to utilize them. What I have here is, this came from Discovery Education. I thought this was a really good resource to promote conversation or discourse across content areas, because they have here literacy in mathematics, literacy in science, literacy in history and social studies, in English language arts, in the visual arts, in media, in health. I mean, again, I think this is a very good resource for you to think about using during your presentation. Again, look for things that make sense to you. Look for things that will help you meet the objectives. And there's another social studies document. Now, of course, when you print this out, it's not going to be sideways. But when you look at it, it takes the different social studies practices, those 6 practices that are so important in the social studies framework, and it gives you some ideas and different ways of incorporating it. Now, again, I'm going through this understandably quickly, but you really have to go through this and look for ways to make this work for you. I referenced the CLT refresher that took place this past Saturday. And here you will see the Catholic Social Teaching by grade span. I referenced that particular document. This document here, the CI, Social Studies Framework, that's the Catholic Identity Framework developed by the Interdiocesan Curriculum Committee. This is segmented by grade level, and it incorporates Catholic social teaching into the different grade levels, gives you suggestions. Now again, we started with the 7 themes for social teaching simply because they are very easy to fit into the social studies curriculum. But when you look at the presentation that's in here, which is the social studies update for CLT, you'll see that I've incorporated a quote that I think is very powerful as to why and to how we can incorporate our Catholic identity and influential Catholics in the teaching of social studies. But in addition to that, I mentioned Bible stories. Not only influential Catholics throughout history, but also Bible stories. What are some Bible stories that might make natural connections? Because if you actually look at the religion curriculum and you look at the social studies curriculum, there is almost a correlation. So these are some of the things that you should be doing on your professional day. And that would obviously, I think, fit in very nicely with session 3. The look-fors were basically for principals, but I think that's something that you might want to look at because those are the things principals should be looking for as they're in classrooms, and obviously you as teachers should need to know that. I think I put this document in here twice. Let me see. Okay. These are the 2 templates that I talked about, the inquiry design model template and the inquiry design model at a glance. Each of those would be important for you to utilize not only in session 2, but also, again, in session 3. Let me open this. Let me see what's this. Oh, yeah, this is, I put that in there twice by mistake. Okay, I'll have to go back and I'll have to get rid of that. That particular document's in there twice. This particular piece of information, the context for teaching and learning, this is an extensive document that Liz and I came across when we were actually preparing for the CLT refresher course, and it has extensive information on the social studies standards. It was developed in Rochester. Coincidentally, that's where Greg Ahlquist, who many of you know, come from. And it has lots of good information. So you might want to look through here and see if there are things that you might want to use for as centerpieces for discussion, but they do a really good job at breaking down the practices, gathering, using evidence, historical thinking, geographic reasoning, social and political participation. All of this, I think, would be very, very helpful for you as you go about planning your day. Okay. So in addition to that, there are tons of resources. This was given out twice at the CLT refresher program. So you might want to take a look at it. But these are the 2 main websites, and this is also on my PowerPoint presentation for the CLT refresher course. C3teachers.org, that's where you're going to find all of the inquiries. That's a wonderful organization to belong to. You can belong to it. You can click on the link and join it, and you can get newsletters and periodic information from them, as well as the National Council for Social Studies. So these are 2 very, very important resources, and they're right at the top. So that's some of the things that you'll find in the CLT folder. Going back to the folders, foundational documents, I referenced them. I referenced those documents, those are the New York State Social Studies Framework, K to 8, it's the 3C framework for social studies standards. It's the New York State Field Guide and also the New York State Social Studies Standards and Framework K to 12 version with the introduction. I didn't reference these articles at all. They are here to, if you wish to use them, the inquiry arc to instructional practice, the potential of the 3C framework. Again, depending upon how comfortable you are with the material, you may want to utilize that for some discussion. I mean, obviously, I think you don't want to just get up there and talk like what I'm doing for 30 minutes. What you really would like to do is give a little bit of information, give teachers time to discuss, give them opportunities to share, and then move them along that way throughout the day. So the other one is monitoring the shifts. Because Liz and I made a big case that if you cannot articulate the shifts in the social studies standards, then it's going to be very, very difficult to have those shifts implemented in our classrooms. And I would say the same thing about the shifts in social studies. I would say the same thing about the shifts in mathematics. I would say the same thing about the shifts in science, so on and so forth. So again, that you're going to find in the social studies articles. Then I left the social studies presentation for administrators. This is all material. Now, some of this material, obviously, is there twice. But again, if you've been using it and you know it's in that folder, I just took those folders and placed them on or in my folders so that you have them available. The turnkey leaders training, that's where you're going to find a lot of material. The prototype for the regents is in there. Okay, it's listed as prototype for PD May 2016, but that's the regents draft document. And then these are all of the documents that Greg shared with you, the curriculum planning document. Again, where you might want to use this simply because you want to at some point provide an opportunity for teachers to talk about connections to ELA, connections to math, connections to science, where the key ideas connect. You might want to give that to the content area teachers that are not social studies teachers. You want to do that in session 3. So that curriculum planning document could be very useful for teachers other than social studies teachers during that third session. The evaluating the practices, that was an activity Greg did with you during our turnkey presentation. Then we actually, I mean, these are all online, but Uncle Tom's Cabin, the French Revolution were 2 IDMs that were used during Greg's presentation. You're free to use any IDM that you wish. Obviously, I don't think you're going to use the 10th grade one. You might want to use the kindergarten one, and there was a 3rd grade one that we used in the CLT refresher course. So if we go back to that folder, maybe I'll go back there later and I'll show you. There was a 3rd grade IDM that we used. So again, you have a lot of materials at your disposal. So I'm hoping that I've given you enough to work with during, or in preparation for the day. And of course, as always, you can always find me at the office via email at abiscione@drvc.org, or you can always call 718, that's not right, you know that, 516-280-2479, extension 813. So I hope that's given you perhaps some ideas to work with. And as I said, I'm always available if you have any questions. So once again, just before I sign off, again, one of the things that's critically important, and I'm thinking back to when we had the brainstorming session with some of you that came here to the DOE Center. It's very important that all teachers understand that what's at the base of the social studies curriculum is inquiry. It's inquiry, and that inquiry is going to come through the inquiry design model. In addition to that, it's understanding the shifts. In addition to that, it's understanding the social studies practices. In fact, what I think I need to do is go back and explicitly say, perhaps in session 1, to spend some time talking about the shifts. So I think I'm going to go back and put that in, because I think that's very, very important. I just thought of this too. I want to draw your attention to the CLT refresher folder. And if you look at the New York State Social Studies, if you look at the update, I'm going to go through this briefly because many of you were not there, but I think it's important. Because basically, well, that's a preview of science. We're not going to worry about that right now. But what I did was I talked about the fact that it's important to look at next year as a year of transition. And even though that there were no test planned for social studies in the elementary school, there might be cause for relaxation on the part of elementary school teachers, but it's a source of fear for the high school teachers. We need to know the shifts. The Catholic identity piece is important, and that's the New York State website, and again, the 3cteachers.org. This isn't that important for our purposes. I talked about it on Saturday, but this is a very interesting little clip from Greg Ahlquist, because it's basically a nice introduction to the day, because those of you that were there know that I asked you to listen to it, and then I asked you to identify 3 important points. Of course, the points people picked up on very readily, and these are the points. And this, again, if you look at this, it looks very similar to the day's outline. We want students to understand the skills. We want them to be practicing the skills. We want them to make those skills need to be second nature. And the way we're going to do that is by understanding the shifts and by honing in on those social studies practices. Then we picked up on the inquiry design model, the inquiry arc and the 4 dimensions. And then we talked about the themes of social justice. Now, we didn't have time on Saturday to really unpack this. Those of you that were there know that. But you have time to do it during your day. These are the shifts. You've already seen them. We've talked about them. One teacher actually said to me, it was a Brooklyn teacher that I know, that are you saying that they don't need to know facts? No, I'm not saying that they don't need to know facts. What I'm saying, though, is we need to shift away from a classroom where facts are the only mode of transmission of knowledge to a classroom where concepts and content are developed through the skills. Because if students are working with the material, interfacing with the material, they're going, the timelines and the people and the places, that's going to be that's going to become embedded in their knowledge. So they're going to be able to take that knowledge, they're going to be able to use it, they're going to be able to transfer it. There are certain things that may need to be memorized. I would say the same thing in mathematics. There are certain things that need to be memorized. But it's not just memorization. It cannot stop there. The second shift, where we talk about teacher as disseminator, all this stuff, you know all this already. We've gone through this. Greg went through this. I went through it again on Saturday. I talked about this with the principals. So again, we don't just want kids to retell. We want them to be able to construct interpretations and communicate conclusions, very similar to the English language arts standards. And again, almost very similar also in math, where students need to look at a problem and be able to solve it, not based upon their knowledge of that problem, but based upon the knowledge of problems like that. They need to be able to explain how they arrived at an answer. They have to communicate those conclusions. So there are a lot of correlations, and I really want teachers, all teachers, to see those connections. And of course, we're talking about the third instructional shift, where a classroom moves from just learning content to really integrating and applying concept. That's the key. But again, all of this is there for your use. Social studies practices, you saw we had a lot of the social studies practices. We had worksheets. They were in the additional background information. They were in the additional resources, as well as in the resources that are in Greg Ahlquist's presentation. So I hope that that will be useful to you. We stuck this slide in on Saturday. I felt strongly about it because I wanted people to understand what used to be advanced placement practices is now going to be just plain Regents practices. So there's that raising of the standards, the increasing rigor of the 21st century. This is a slide that I referenced. I think this slide, in addition to the Discovery Education slide that I referenced earlier, with the literacy across disciplines, this is a good place to stop and have teachers have a rich discussion about how what they do in their classrooms, though they teach different content areas, there's a lot of similarities. The inquiry design arc, and again, there's a lot of background information in the foundational documents for the inquiry design arc. Mostly, I guess you'll find it in the 3C framework document. This is the other slide I mentioned earlier, the dimensions of inquiry and how they're broken down. So you know the first dimension, developing questions and planning inquiries. You're going to be developing those compelling questions, but as time goes on, we want students to develop those compelling questions. And again, just two things about compelling questions. They're very much like essential questions. Again, those of you that were there on Saturday know that. Greg said it basically when he was here with you as turnkey leaders. They should be meaty questions. They should be questions that cause you to think, something like who won the Cold War. That certainly is not an easy question to answer, and it takes a lot of investigating and a lot of research and a lot of citing evidence to formulate an argument based around that. Was the American Revolutionary War revolutionary? That was another one. That's actually, I think, in the 7th grade inquiry that we've used at various times. Can U.S. and Canada be friends forever? Well, that's an interesting question as well. So, I mean, they have to be meaty questions. They should also obviously be grade appropriate. So what's appropriate for, like for instance, the IDM in the kindergarten that focuses on needs and wants is very different than perhaps a 7th grade social studies unit that might focus on the Revolutionary War. And looking at applying the disciplinary tools, looking at how the standards, remember we still have those standards, the history, geography, the economics, and the civics of a situation need to be covered. Gathering and evaluating sources and developing claims by using evidence. Again, that's very, very important. This is how we're going to develop inquiry. This is how we're going to develop those social studies skills that are so necessary for students to achieve on the Regents. Communicating conclusions and taking informed action. Now, Greg talked about this. I didn't talk about it up until now, but it's a very important piece that can't be forgotten. If you look at those IDMs, the last step or the last part of it is what are you going to do about it? Now that you know this, what are you going to do about it, and how does it relate to your world? So all of this is inherent in everything we've been talking about. This is the quote I referenced in terms of the Catholic worldview. Sometimes we forget how much the church has impacted all the different aspects of our Western culture. The history standards underscore how God has sacramentalized history and how the lives of saints often have influenced history and culture. History is filled with the Catholic influence, and we need to be using that Catholic worldview perspective when we are instructing our students. And we talked about the 7 themes. There's the link I was talking about that'll take you right to the USCCB website. And again, remember, the themes are only the beginning. We start with them because they're the easiest, but there are other things that you could think about. Look at the social studies curriculum and religion curriculum side by side. See where the connections are. Let's look at prominent and influential Catholics in history. Let's look at Bible stories and see where they connect. So again, these are just some of the things. The culture diversity IDM was one that we looked at on Saturday. Again, not in any great depth, but it might be worth looking at. And we did talk about what principals should be seeing in their classrooms, and that document is also available to you. I think I put that in the administrator section, in the administrator's presentation section. And these are just 2 more resources in addition to the whole list of resources that you have available to you. So again, I think I've given you hopefully more information than you had when you started. Go on My Folders. When you go on My Folders and DRVC, Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and you search the folders, you will find one that says March PD Day Resources. And the folders are there, the information is there. So I think that's probably enough for now. And if I get any more materials, I'll begin to add them to the folders that we have there. So once again, thank you for joining me, and I hope that this was helpful.